At what point do short-term cost reductions outweigh the long-term damage to communities, industries, and reputations? A few days ago, someone leaked an email from BYD seemingly demanding a 10% discount from suppliers. There's a strongly worded email from a supplier replying to BYD. The reply email gives a pretty alarming insight into some of the pressures and ethical questions that are currently at play in the Chinese EV industry. For BYD, staying on top in the world's most competitive EV market might mean asking suppliers to shoulder that burden. I'll show you the original email as well as the reply from the supplier in this video. Thanks for being here, folks. I really appreciate your time. I'm Ben Alexander and I make EV news videos. The email from BYD begins by emphasizing BYD's success up until this point, subtly reminding the supplier of BYD's importance as a client and the potential for even greater opportunities as their sales continue to surge. For example, last year they sold 3 million vehicles. This year it's 4.2 roughly. The part that has everyone riled up is where they state, in order to enhance BYD's passenger car competitiveness, we need the entire supply chain to work together and to continue to reduce costs. Therefore, I put forward the following requirement. Requirement is an odd choice of word, isn't it, I think? So the price of your products will be reduced by 10% from January 1st. Please take this seriously with your team. Explore the space for cost reduction and actively promote the achievement of the requirements. Please contact BYD's resource development team as soon as possible and report the reduced price to us through the SRM system before December 15th. Of course, there are mixed opinions on the true intent of this statement, but lots of people interpret it as a demand, not a request for negotiation, especially when especially when they are actually giving them a due date to confirm the discount. A supplier's response to BYD's email that was translated by a user on X shows that the email was not kindly received at all, but this response actually goes a lot deeper and highlights some major issues that are clearly at play. Parts of the response say stuff like, your company's practices are not only unethical, but also exploit the hard work and resilience of the Chinese workforce and undermine the viability of domestic suppliers. Your approach of cutthroat pricing and relentless pressure on suppliers has destabilized the market, leading to a vicious cycle of unethical business practices. BYD's short-term gains are built on the back of squeezed suppliers and compromised business ethics. This approach endangers not just your company, but the entire industrial supply chain, ultimately harming the long-term interests of Chinese workers and enterprises. We cannot accept your price reduction request and will not participate in practices that compromise business ethics and human dignity. So they're clearly not happy in the slightest. They're not happy. There's been a real mixture of responses to both the email and the supplier's response online, with some people really excusing BYD's email and saying that it is normal practice in the automotive industry, while other people are really condemning the practice of asking for discounts like this, saying that it's ultimately going to undermine the integrity of the automotive industry. It seemed like BYD's response to the leaked email heavily attempted to normalize this kind of request put forward as a kind of statement, or they're stating we kind of request 10% off and that's how this is going forward. The general manager of BYD's brand and PR department, Lee Yongfei, he said, and I quote this, they put forward price reduction targets for suppliers based on large-scale procurement, which is a non-mandatory requirement. We can negotiate. That's what he said. Again, it's clear that they're trying to play it down to normalize it, which I think is really dangerous to do that, even if BYD's statements are true and they are open to supposed negotiation. Is that really an option when the competition has got to such a point where there would be so many other suppliers who are ready to jump in and take their place? It also looks as though the price war has got to a point where automakers are aggressively pushing for price cuts and even withholding payment as a tactic to achieve greater discounts. A translation posted by a Twitter or X user of an article from China Automotive News from October reports on the fact that the practice of No discount, no payment is becoming more and more common in China. And the article said, quote, automakers frequently push for the price cuts of 10-20% from their parts suppliers, withholding payment if these demands aren't met, with payments for goods delivered in January often delayed until December. And before December, these companies often start to negotiate. The article mentions that these practices are common, but they force suppliers to accept the conditions in order to stay relevant in the market, and the cost cut has to be absorbed by profit losses further down the supply chain. So vehicle manufacturers know that they have this kind of coercive power over suppliers. They can opt to transfer this pressure down under them to the supply chain. That's, I think, what they're doing. According to Bloomberg data from May this year, a heap of Chinese car manufacturers are taking almost an entire year to pay their suppliers. We can see that at the end of 2023, BYD was taking about 275 days to pay its suppliers. This is interesting when we consider BYD's success. BYD is maintaining a 21.9% gross margin despite slashing prices, compared to Tesla's recent margin of 17.9%. And they're doing very well, so they shouldn't really take that long to pay their suppliers. The article highlights the knock-on effects that suppliers suffer as a result of this. When you get to tier 3 or 4 suppliers, they can no longer pass it on, and suppliers really are going bankrupt as a result of this. Some people have mentioned that this practice can be positive because it puts the onus on the suppliers to be the most reliable, and it actually might help weed out the least efficient suppliers. But I think there are real risks to this mindset when you have so much downward pressure to reduce costs. Quality is bound to suffer. It's got to suffer. And as consumers, I think we all might agree with this. I think we should be quite concerned about it. If you look at the decline of the US automotive industry after the 1980s, a lot of similar practices were happening back then, where manufacturers were just constantly squeezing suppliers for profit at the expense of a collaborative relationship where everybody's winning. The result of this was that there was a huge reduction in research and development and quality control within the supply chain, which basically meant that eventually they just couldn't compete with Japanese and German manufacturers, and they were starting to look a little bit basic and primitive maybe. Another major aspect to think about within this is who might actually be impacted by major automakers' aggressive cost cutting. Who might be suffering here? It seems pretty viable that there would be a trickle-down effect, and that means less money in someone's pocket somewhere along the line. The reply from the supplier is really revealing of this. The growth of China's auto industry should not come at the expense of its workers and suppliers, and they describe BYD's request as a practice that compromises business ethics and human dignity. So the supplier's response really frames BYD's approach as harmful to workers and unethical, and it raises a crucial question: at what point do short-term cost reductions outweigh the long-term damage to communities, industries, and reputations? So BYD has built its brand on innovation and reliability, but continued supplier dissatisfaction could result in declining quality, delays in production, or maybe even public backlash for this. It is beginning to look like the BYD and the Chinese automotive industry as a whole is allowing suppliers to be backed into a corner. If they want to work with major automotive manufacturers, they are forced to cut prices and will eventually be forced to cut corners. We might never actually hear about who the real losers are in this situation, but it could be us, the consumers, and the day-to-day workers who are actually building these cars from ground up.